What if the bullet that ignited the deadliest conflict in human history simply missed? On that fateful June morning in 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand's car swerves at the last second in Sarajevo, sparing the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne from Gavrilo Princip's fatal shot. No assassination. No ultimatum to Serbia. No cascade of alliances dragging Europe into the abyss of World War I. In this alternate timeline, the fragile peace of empires holds, barely, unleashing a chain of butterfly effects that reshape nations, technologies, and destinies. Buckle up as we dive into a world where the Great War never was, and history veers into uncharted territory. The morning of June 28, 1914, unfolds much as it did in our timeline, until the pivotal moment of chaos. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir presumptive to the Austro-Hungarian throne, and his wife Sophie ride in an open-top Graf and Stift automobile through the bustling streets of Sarajevo. The Black Hand conspirators have already struck once. A bomb hurled earlier detonates under the wrong car, wounding bystanders but leaving the royal couple unscathed. Undeterred, the motorcade continues, but in this divergence, the driver, Leopold Lojka, receives clear instructions after the explosion. Instead of the fateful wrong turn onto Franz Josefstrasse, where Gavrilo Princip lurks with his Browning pistol, the chauffeur sticks to the planned route along the Appel Quay. Princip, positioned at a deli corner, watches helplessly as the Archduke's car speeds past without stopping. No shots ring out. The heir and his morganatic wife return safely to the governor's residence, shaken but alive. News of the failed attempt ripples across Europe like a thunderclap that never quite breaks into storm. In Vienna, Emperor Franz Joseph, aging and conservative, breathes a sigh of relief. His nephew, whom he privately distrusted for his reformist ideas, survives to potentially succeed him. Franz Ferdinand, known for advocating federalism to appease the empire's restless ethnic groups, Slavs, Czechs, Hungarians, immediately pushes for restraint. He cables Vienna, urging against overreaction, arguing that punishing Serbia harshly would alienate South Slavs within the empire and risk internal fracture. Austria-Hungary's leadership, emboldened by the survival but wary of appearing weak, issues a stern protest to Belgrade, demanding investigation into the Black Hand's Serbian ties. Yet without the martyrdom of the Archduke, there's no overwhelming public outrage to fuel an ultimatum. Kaiser Wilhelm II in Germany, who had pledged unwavering support in case of war, now hedges. His blank check loses urgency. Serbia, sensing the shift, complies partially with inquiries, extraditing minor figures while denying state involvement. Tensions simmer through July, the infamous July crisis, but diplomacy prevails. British Foreign Secretary Edward Grey mediates quietly, Russian Tsar Nicholas II urges caution to protect Slavic interests without escalation, and French President Poincaré reinforces alliances subtly but avoids provocation. By August, the crisis diffuses. No Austrian declaration of war on Serbia. No Russian mobilization triggering German invasion plans. The Schlieffen Plan gathers dust, armies remain in barracks. Europe exhales, but the butterfly effects begin immediately. Balkan nationalism, unchecked by war's exhaustion, festers. Serbia grows bolder in irredentist claims, while Austria-Hungary accelerates internal reforms under Franz Ferdinand's influence. He pressures Franz Joseph for a United States of Greater Austria, a trialist structure elevating Slavs alongside Germans and Hungarians. Stock markets stabilize, avoiding the panic sell-offs. Colonial administrations in Africa and Asia continue exploiting resources without wartime strains. Yet cracks appear elsewhere. Without war's unifying distraction, labor unrest boils over in Britain and France. Strikes paralyze industries in 1915. In Russia, Tsar Nicholas faces mounting discontent from the Duma and revolutionaries, but no battlefield defeats to discredit the regime yet. The Ottoman Empire, spared alliance with Germany, navigates neutrality longer, delaying Armenian tragedies but prolonging internal decay. America, under Woodrow Wilson, remains firmly isolationist, its economy booming from European trade undisrupted by U-boats. This narrow escape preserves the old order, for now, but plants seeds of profound change, as empires grapple with modernity without the crucible of total war. As empires grapple with modernity without the crucible of total war, the absence of the Great War's devastating toll begins to profoundly reshape the global balance of power. By the late 1910s, Europe remains a patchwork of multi-ethnic monarchies, but the strains of nationalism and industrialization, unvented by battlefield sacrifice, erupt in new and unpredictable ways. Franz Ferdinand ascends the throne in 1916 following the death of the elderly Franz Joseph. The new emperor, now Franz I, swiftly implements his long-cherished United States of Greater Austria plan. The dual monarchy transforms into a federal trialist structure. Germans, Hungarians, and South Slavs gain equal status under a shared crown, with regional parliaments in Prague, Zagreb, and Budapest. Czechs and Poles receive cultural autonomy, while Ruthenians and Romanians see limited concessions. This bold reform stabilizes the Habsburg realm temporarily, blunting pan-Slavic agitation from Serbia and reducing the appeal of revolutionary socialism among urban workers. Yet it alienates conservative Magyar elites, who fear loss of privilege, sparking sporadic uprisings in Hungary through 1918 to 1920 that required German mediation to suppress. Germany, under Kaiser Wilhelm II, emerges as the continent's undisputed industrial and military hegemon. Without the exhausting two-front war, the High Seas Fleet expands unchecked, challenging British naval supremacy in a renewed arms race. Dreadnought construction accelerates on both sides of the North Sea, but Britain, facing Irish Home Rule crises and suffragette militancy at home, struggles to match Berlin's pace. Colonial tensions flare. In 1919, a German-backed Boer revolt in South Africa nearly severs British control, forcing London to concede dominion status earlier than anticipated. Russia, spared the carnage of the Eastern Front, avoids immediate revolution, but the Romanov regime rots from within. Tsar Nicholas II's inept governance and the influence of Rasputin, who survives longer without wartime stress, fuel aristocratic coups and peasant unrest. By 1921, a palace revolt removes Nicholas in favor of his brother Grand Duke Michael, who establishes a constitutional monarchy with a stronger Duma. Liberal reforms follow, yet Bolshevik cells, never hardened by underground wartime networks, remain marginal. Russia industrializes rapidly with French and American capital, its vast army modernizing along German lines, positioning it as a looming counterweight to both Berlin and Vienna. Across the Atlantic, the United States thrives in splendid isolation. Unburdened by war debts or League of Nations entanglements, Wall Street booms through the 1920s on exports to a stable Europe. Immigration continues unabated, swelling cities with Eastern European talent fleeing lingering ethnic tensions. Technological innovation surges. Automotive giants like Ford expand into European markets without wartime disruption, while aviation pioneers such as the Wright brothers receive sustained government funding, achieving transatlantic passenger flights by 1925. In the Balkans, Serbia, embittered by Austria's survival and reform success, alliances secretly with Russia and Greece, forming an anti-Habsburg bloc. Border skirmishes erupt in 1923 over Macedonia, escalating into the Balkan War of 1924 to 1925. Lacking the exhaustion of 1912 to 1913 campaigns, Serbia performs better, seizing territory before a German-Austrian intervention forces a ceasefire. The conflict redraws maps modestly, granting Serbia access to the Adriatic but leaving Yugoslavia's unification unrealized. The Ottoman Empire, neutral and unreformed, crumbles gradually. Without the Arab revolt or Allied carve-up, young Turk modernizers cling to power, but Arab nationalism, fueled by British intrigue, ignites revolts in Syria and Mesopotamia by 1926. A weakened Constantinople loses de facto control over Arabia, where Ibn Saud consolidates power earlier, founding a unified Saudi state backed covertly by London to counter French influence in the Levant. By the late 1920s, the global order tilts toward a tripod of power, a federalized Habsburg realm anchored to Germany, a constitutional but expansive Russia, and a naval-focused British Empire clinging to maritime dominance. No single hegemon emerges, but the stage is set for ideological and imperial rivalries that echo, yet distort, our own history's tragedies. By the late 1920s, the global order tilts toward a tripod of power, a federalized Habsburg realm anchored to Germany, a constitutional but expansive Russia, and a naval-focused British Empire clinging to maritime dominance. No single hegemon emerges, but the stage is set for ideological and imperial rivalries that echo, yet distort, our own history's tragedies. The 1930s usher in an era of fragile prosperity overshadowed by authoritarian currents and colonial unrest. Without the punitive Treaty of Versailles, Germany avoids hyperinflation and the Weimar Republic's collapse. Instead, a stable Kaiserreich under Wilhelm II's son, Wilhelm III after 1928, evolves into a constitutional monarchy with strong nationalist parties. Economic strength fuels rearmament, but no revanchist fury drives it. Rather, a calculated bid for place in the sun, in Africa and the Pacific. Fascism, as we know it, struggles to take root. Mussolini rises in Italy but finds limited appeal beyond the Mediterranean, his corporate state inspiring imitators in Spain and Portugal yet failing to ignite a continental wave. In Eastern Europe, the Habsburg Federation endures but frays at the edges. Ethnic federalism satisfies moderates, yet radical nationalists, Croatian Ustase, Slovak separatists, turn to terrorism, prompting Vienna to adopt increasingly authoritarian measures. By 1935, Emperor Otto, succeeding a childless Franz Ferdinand in 1930, centralizes power, blending monarchism with technocratic control. This Danubian authoritarianism stabilizes the empire but stifles cultural flourishing, driving intellectuals to exile in Paris or New York. Russia's constitutional monarchy, bolstered by oil revenues and American loans, modernizes aggressively. Railways span Siberia, factories rise in Ukraine, and a professional army deters neighbors. Yet social inequalities persist, peasant revolts in the Volga region and worker strikes in Petrograd force concessions, birthing a hybrid system, parliamentary on paper, autocratic in practice. Pan-Slavic ideology surges, positioning Moscow as protector of Orthodox and Slavic peoples, clashing with Habsburg interests in the Balkans. Colonial empires, unweakened by war debts, tighten their grip on Africa and Asia. Britain crushes independence movements in India with reform divide-and-rule tactics, granting limited dominion status to loyal princely states while suppressing Gandhi's civil disobedience earlier and more brutally. France expands in North Africa, Germany regains Cameroon and Tanzania through diplomacy, and Belgium's Congo remains a rubber-fueled horror unchecked by international scrutiny. Decolonization delays indefinitely. By the 1940s, educated elites in Lagos, Hanoi, and Algiers agitate for reform, but metropolitan powers invest in infrastructure to buy loyalty, prolonging the imperial age. Culturally, the absence of war's trauma unleashes a prolonged Belle Époque. The Roaring Twenties extend into the 30s. Art Deco skyscrapers dominate skylines from Vienna to Chicago, jazz migrates to European cafes without the shadow of loss, and cinema flourishes with transatlantic collaborations. Aviation leaps forward, regular passenger routes cross the Atlantic by 1930, shrinking the world and fostering a cosmopolitan elite unscarred by trenches. Science advances steadily, quantum physics, penicillin, early computing, without wartime urgency, but also without the moral reckoning over chemical weapons or total mobilization. Socially, women's suffrage spreads gradually through reform rather than wartime necessity. By 1940, most European nations enfranchise women, yet traditional hierarchies endure. Anti-Semitism simmers in pockets, Russia's pogroms persist sporadically, Eastern European blood libels flare, but without the crucible of defeat and economic ruin, no industrialized genocide emerges. Jewish communities thrive in cultural centers like Prague and Budapest, contributing disproportionately to arts and sciences. Yet beneath the veneer, tensions mount toward a multipolar confrontation. Proxy conflicts in the Middle East, British versus Russian influence in Persia, and naval incidents in the Pacific foreshadow a colder, more protracted struggle for dominance, one defined by imperial endurance rather than ideological apocalypse. Yet beneath the veneer, tensions mount toward a multipolar confrontation. Proxy conflicts in the Middle East, British versus Russian influence in Persia, and naval incidents in the Pacific foreshadow a colder, more protracted struggle for dominance, one defined by imperial endurance rather than ideological apocalypse. The inevitable reckoning arrives in the early 1950s, not as a single cataclysmic war but as a series of cascading crises historians later dubbed the Great Imperial War, 1952 to 1959. It begins in the Balkans, where Serbian-backed insurgents overthrow Habsburg authority in Bosnia, prompting Vienna and Berlin to intervene. Russia, honoring Pan-Slavic commitments, mobilizes along the Carpathians. Britain, fearing German naval encirclement, declares support for the Entente Cordiale powers and blockades the North Sea. Japan, allied with Britain since 1902 and eyeing Russian Siberia, strikes Vladivostok. The conflict remains conventional, no atomic fires, no blitzkrieg, but mechanized armies, advanced aircraft, and massive battle fleets turn Europe, Asia, and the oceans into killing grounds on a scale rivaling our own world wars. Exhaustion forces an armistice in 1959. The Treaty of Geneva redraws the map dramatically. The Habsburg Federation dissolves into successor states, Austria, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and a South Slav kingdom under Serbian dominance. Germany retains its core but loses colonies and naval restrictions. Russia sheds Poland, Finland, and the Baltic states, retreating into isolationist authoritarianism. Britain preserves most of its empire but grants India dominion status in 1962 to forestall revolution. The post-war world settles into a true multipolar order dominated by five great powers: a republican Germany, a constitutional but diminished Britain, a wary United States now fully engaged globally, a resurgent Japan, and a brooding Russian directorate. Communism never achieves world historical status, Lenin dies in obscurity, and Marxist parties remain fringe movements in industrialized nations. Instead, the dominant ideologies become managed nationalism, technocratic monarchism, and liberal imperialism. Technologically, the delayed total war means slower progress in some fields. Nuclear fission is demonstrated only in 1964, rocketry lags, computers remain room-sized, but accelerated advances in others. Transatlantic jet travel begins in the late 1950s, television spreads rapidly, and antibiotics eradicate diseases earlier thanks to uninterrupted research. Space exploration becomes a prestige race among multiple powers. The first human moon landing occurs in 1978 under a joint German-Japanese mission. Socially, the absence of our timeline's twin cataclysms preserves more traditional structures longer. Women's rights advance steadily through reform rather than wartime necessity, achieving near-universal suffrage by 1970 yet retaining stronger gender norms in many societies. Jewish communities flourish in Central Europe and America, producing cultural and scientific giants without the shadow of the Holocaust. Migration patterns differ profoundly. Fewer Europeans flee to the Americas, while colonial subjects move to metropolitan centers in greater numbers, creating multicultural empires decades ahead of our decolonization wave. In our real year 2025, this alternate world stands as a paradox, more conservative yet strangely progressive, scarred by one massive mid-century war rather than two, wealthier in many regions but marked by enduring great power rivalries. The United Nations, founded in 1960, possesses real teeth with permanent security forces. Climate change emerges as the unifying threat earlier, unmasked by ideological blinders. And in Sarajevo, tourists visit a modest plaque on the Latin Bridge reading, "Here, on June 28, 1914, history took a different turn. One missed bullet spared the world the trenches of the Somme and the death camps of Auschwitz, only to deliver a longer, slower reckoning with the contradictions of empire." The butterfly effect reminds us how fragile the path of history truly is. A single driver's correct turn, a fraction of a second's delay, and the 20th century becomes unrecognizable, neither utopia nor dystopia, but a profoundly human alternate reality where peace in 1914 merely postponed, rather than prevented, the storms to come. Thank you for joining this journey through a world that never was. If one moment, one chance event, could derail the deadliest century in human history, what other turning points lie hidden in our own timeline, waiting for us to notice?